I've provocatively said recently that you can't have a political conversation with somebody who thinks the news is real. You just can't, because they will be working under some brainwashed understanding of what's happening. And this works both ways. It's not just one side. So politics is mostly a brainwashing competition.
This isn't your average business podcast, and he's not your average host. This is the James Altucher Show.
It's funny, the last 8 years went so quickly.
It did. And I guess, obviously we're both getting older, but it seems like one consistent arc, because 8 years ago started the whole kind of Trump cycle. So it's like there's been one political arc where we went from an Obama, Romney, McCain type of country to a Trump, Hillary, Biden type of country.
Yeah, we've seen it all, and now this feels like kind of a repeat in a way. Do you feel that? It's like, oh God, not another Trump run for president.
It's a repeat, but it's also like Return of the Jedi. So like Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back sets up the story, and now there better be a fucking close to this story, or something bad's gonna happen.
Yeah, I've been talking about this as a 3-act movie for years. And oh my God, is the movie nice. But the thing the movie requires is the Kraken. The Kraken has to appear before the election. In other words, there has to be a legitimate court confirmed problem with the election.
Yeah, and I heard you talking about that just now on your coffee with Sky Adams, which I actually want to talk about that format with you a little later. But you mentioned how basically, so there's been a lot of cybersecurity conferences this summer. The biggest one is DEF CON. So basically, you mentioned there's been a cybersecurity conference recently where a bunch of kids in a room hacked every aspect of the election, of a simulated election, using the latest software, machines, and so on. And your point is, why even have election if this is true? And B, obviously, if a bunch of kids can do it, China can do it. If China can do it, we can do it to them. So it's all a mess. And there's not really a solution.
There really isn't.
I mean, the solution is, which also you kind of suggest, is that since it does break the law, you need some aspect of a conspiracy. You need people willing to break a law, and you need to avoid issues with whistleblowers. And then it starts to get too hard to believe that a concerted effort would happen to steal an election. And yet it's possible.
Well, if it happens through electronic means, you don't need any accomplices, and nobody would ever find it, I think.
Yeah, I mean, and so I since your thing this morning, I've talked to some cybersecurity experts about this, and their only solution is that you need to have more investment from government in, securing election machines. But I don't know if that really solves the problem, because the bad guys are always smarter than the good guys in cybersecurity. That's kind of the mantra of cybersecurity.
Well, I mean, they've been doing this hacking thing for years, and every time they do it, they find a bunch of really big vulnerabilities, and then they get patched, and then there's just a new bunch. So it may be just baked into the technology that you can't get it, hack-proof. I mean, certainly if the FBI is right and China is already in our major infrastructure everywhere in the country, there's nothing that's hack-proof.
Yeah, but your point is a kind of a mutual assured destruction thing, which is if they screw with us, we will screw with them. But I would say China is this weird kind of country where they're like in our face saying, all right, do it, because they don't care.
Well, I gave up trying to figure out what China's thinking, because I always think, okay, I should be a little more humble about that. I don't know what they're thinking. We only know what they're doing. But China always strikes me as the country that's not trying to create a war. Like that's the one thing they're very, very consistent about. And that makes sense, because if you're China, you just have to wait. Like, it looks like time is on their side. It's like, well, check back in 200 years. Let's see who's running this planet. We'll just make money. We'll just have babies and make money, although the making babies thing is slowing down. But the last thing they want is a war, and I think that's true with us and Russia, at least a direct war.
So in terms of the election, and actually, I want to get to a bunch of other things, but in terms of the election, what's our alternative if we just simply don't trust the election process?
Well, other countries do paper ballots, vote the same day, show your ID, have observers. If you gave me those things, and I could make sure somebody's watching everything get counted, and if you needed to recount it, you would just recount the ballots with somebody else watching. If you did that, I don't know how the cheating would happen. So, I mean,
All
it'd be
right.
really hard to cheat in that case.
Yeah, that's a good point. And so this is what I don't understand. And this is not a Democrat or Republican thing. It's like a common sense thing. Who it could possibly be against the showing of ID to vote? And now, of course, you could say, well, there's a lot of people who you know, okay, the theory is Democrats don't want you to show ID because then illegal immigrants could vote for them and they'd win every single election ever. Like, is that really, does anyone actually think that? Is that really like a true thing?
Well, I'm still waiting for the first human being to say, I'd really love to vote, but I can't figure out how. Like, I don't know how to get an ID, and I wouldn't know who to talk to ask how to vote. Like, I need at least one human being out of, there are many 300 million, whatever, to say that they can't figure it out. And the problem is that whoever they said it to would say, oh, well, let me show you. Like,
Yeah.
the moment you said you didn't know how to do it, the very first person would say, "Well, I have an ID. Here,
So,
just go down to the DMV."
yeah, given that you need an ID for every, like, I am probably the closest person to what you just described. Like, I can't figure out anything that involves paperwork or bureaucracy. I don't have a driver's license. It's hard for me to every April to just figure out the paperwork, like what forms do I need for taxes, and I get into trouble. Like, it's a big issue for me. So I am the type of person who might show up at a voting center and I just can't vote for some reason. But like, Kathy Hochul, the governor of New York, even said something like, "Oh, well, some people are too poor to have the internet or to have an ID." You need an ID for everything else. I still fly an airplane miraculously with an ID. And so you're right. Like, so who actually wants people with no IDs to vote? Is there a law out there? Are there laws out there?
Well, I'm not sure that the game is to get the people with no IDs to vote. It might have something to do with allowing the non-citizens coming across the border to at least get mail-in ballots. So that's the thing I worry about. It's not so much that the people who don't have ID or are not citizens can actually go in person and vote. I don't think there's a ton of that, or at least not enough to change the election. But what there might be a ton of is millions of people who got automatically signed up to vote, even though it's not legal for them to vote. They might get mailed a ballot. So having millions of ballots that are sort of floating around and available for somebody to harvest, that looks like a risk, and it looks like maybe the biggest one.
Right. And I think I've even heard you say a couple of months ago that maybe no other countries or not many countries have a mail-in voting process.
Well, I'm not an expert in that, but I'm not aware of any. And I do know that, well, let's just put it this way. If you look at our system, you have to ask this question, which I've never seen anyone else ask except me, which is, why do you have electronic voting machines at all? Now, your common sense says, oh, well, obviously they're more efficient, they save time, you get a better result, it's more accurate, the public will believe it, and we're done with the counting as soon as the last vote comes in. And I'm thinking, okay, how much of that is true? None of it. It's not faster than hand-counted ballots. We wait days where countries who just have ballots, they just count them up. Then some people say, but Scott, we have so much bigger population. To which I say, we also have, 157,000 people volunteered to be poll watchers just on the Republican side. We got all the people you need. If you need more people to count ballots, it's probably not hard at all to get as many as you need. So if it's not faster, I'm sure it's not cheaper. It couldn't possibly be easier to administer because of all the maintenance and keeping the security upgraded, etc. Why do they exist? Now, the thing I worry about is that the only reason they exist is so that our country could control the elections in other countries. Because, if we thought we could hack them or we thought we had some kind of inside track, it would be a good way to overthrow other countries and make sure that they got the leaders that liked America. Now, if that same equipment that these hypothetical people in America were using to control other elections was used in America, would it give them, hypothetically, access to control American elections? Now, I don't know why else they exist. Nobody's ever even offered an alternative explanation, as in, well, Scott, you idiot. It's obvious the advantages are
Well,
what?
okay, just playing the devil's advocate, you mentioned faster. It does seem when you have an electronic voting machine, just conceptually, it's gonna be instant to count, and
Why isn't it?
that's faster.
What? But we observe it's not. We observe that it takes. Isn't it Pennsylvania or I forget which state? Maybe Pennsylvania already said, don't expect these to be counted right away. It might be a day or two, and usually they're talking about maybe mail-in ballots that were legal to be counted but didn't yet get counted. Maybe they were in the mail or something like that. So there's always a reason why we don't get a fast result in the United States. If we did, I would say, that's a pretty good argument.
Yeah, so, you know, two directions. One is, I mentioned earlier, we've been having podcasts for you and I for 8 years. You were originally the Dilbert guy. For hundreds of years, you were the guy who wrote Dilbert. Everybody who has a cubicle has Dilbert cartoons hung up in their cubicle. That's who you were. You were this guy who everybody knew. Everybody knew Dilbert, loved Dilbert. And you had tons of books. There was a potential for a cartoon. We talked about originally your amazing story of how you pitched Dilbert everywhere, and just by luck, really, kind of, luck born from persistence, but your Dilbert was picked up and then became the most widely syndicated cartoon. Such a great story. You have books about your story. Everything was great. Now, Dilbert's nowhere. And I shouldn't say it's nowhere.
It's
online.
By prescription. Well, by a subscription, yeah.
Yeah. Prescription and subscription. You need to read more Dilbert.
You need both.
And you offer this really astute analysis on politics. Like back in 2015, February of 2015, I think it was, you said when there's still 18 candidates running for the Republican nomination for president early on in that election, you said Donald Trump is going to be the next winner. And your basis was, your training in hypnosis, and you felt he was like the best hypnotist you've ever seen. And that proved to be true. And now here we are, so many years later. Nobody was expecting him to be the nominee again. Of course, he's the nominee. And now it's this really interesting election where Biden drops out. And because he was clearly something was off. It's almost sad. Like did you see this interview he just did explaining what happened?
Yeah. It was hard to watch. It was very difficult to watch that.
It was hard to watch, and I almost think he's worse now medically than when the debate happened. Like it looked to me like he had a stroke at some point recently. Like half his face was drooping a little bit. And I was concerned on that level for him. But now you have Kamala Harris running, and it's a strange thing. Like you mentioned the other day, I thought a very fascinating thing that her campaign is basically claiming she's the generic Democrat, because it's hard to run against a faceless person. Like we know the flaws of Biden, we know the flaws of Kamala Harris. We don't really know the flaws of the generic Democrat. And in fact, many people, including yourself, including me, including Elon Musk last night, said at different points, hey, I was a lifelong Democrat until blah, blah, blah. So everybody's the generic Democrat.
Right.
And So, and you go to her website, there are no issues. You go to Trump's website or any other candidate. I'm not singling out Trump. There's a whole list of issues,
Right.
but
You know,
her website is just donate money.
yeah. On some level, Trump almost doesn't need issues because he's really running to say, how about I do what I did the first term? If you like that, I'll do a little more of that. So you kind of know what you're going to get with him. But he does do the basic hygiene of showing you in writing what he's planning to do. Now, the fact that the propaganda brainwashing machine in this country is so strong that they could keep, first of all, Biden off of the campaign trail and just hide him. And we know now that the reason for hiding him was not just COVID. It's pretty obvious they were hiding him to, keep his gaffes down, and so you couldn't see his decline. But now they're just doing the same play, and it will work for the same reason. I've actually praised it for its persuasive
Yes.
genius, really. I mean, it's literally looks like genius to me. It doesn't look like they just bumbled around and they're starting to get lucky. I think maybe some of the Obama wizards are, applying their craft for Kamala Harris, because the boldness of just not talking to the press and just do scripted things that are speech is so unusual that nobody except an idiot or a genius would even bring that up in a meeting. And I think it's the genius thing. So I would be really worried if I were Trump, because I got some smart people. And the other indication that it's more smart than lucky is where they reframed the cackling that I would imagine
Mm.
annoyed at least most men, that Kamala Harris made her look sort of unserious and, not really like a leader. It was more like somebody laughing at the PTA meeting or something. And they redefined that as joy. And the
That
first
is
time I heard,
genius.
the first time I heard it was like, nah, that's just typical politics. And as it sunk in, and then I watched her rallies where her fans were really overjoyed and they were laughing and literally dancing, and her VP pick is laughing hard. He's bending over in laughter. And I'm thinking, oh my God, they sold that, not just to their base, but I'm watching it as, let's say a critical analyst, and I'm thinking, you actually made that work.
Yeah.
That looks like joy. And
It
oh my
it's really
God,
impressive, actually.
I can't say enough about how brilliant that is. So that would be two hugely unexpected, brilliant moves that came in quick succession after you hadn't seen anything like that from her campaign,
And
or
the
her
other thing
earlier
they've
life.
done, which reminds me of some things you wrote about or things we've talked about after the 2016 election, but you also wrote about in Win Bigly, is they took this word weird and have applied it to the Trump campaign and JD Vance. And I remember talking with you, and you basically said what Trump would do is pick an unusual word that hasn't really been used in politics and apply it to his opponent, so it stands
Uh,
out more.
uh,
And the one thing they didn't do, like you would say how, like, use the word in an unusual way, like sleeping Joe instead of sleeping Joe, like drop the G,
yeah.
and or whatever. They do have the word have some weird spelling. So they didn't do that, but just the phrase weird is not really a word that I've seen in political campaigns before.
Yeah, and, of course, it was picked up everywhere because the persuasion machine knows how to get the word out. We're all gonna say "weird" now, then everybody did in unison. And my take on that is that that was a short-term brilliance, because what they needed was, in the short term, to get people talking about something that was about the other side and not something about Biden failing and Kamala not talking to the press and, not doing the tough stuff. So it was a great diversion, but it had the following weakness, which is people like to be weird. If you talk to any individual, say, describe yourself, they'd say, well, I'm a little weird this way. I'm a little weird. So at first, it's this big distraction that worked perfectly as a distraction, but I think they've already started to back off it because, as I posted, I like being weird. In fact, one of the things I like about the Trump supporters is that I've described it in the past as a pirate ship. It's like, what kind of ship has Elon Musk and, me and, Mike Cernovich and, you kind of go down the line, like now some of the All-In Pod guys and, Bill Ackman's on this ship and like, what do they even have in common? Yeah, that's the hard thing to figure out. It's like, what do they have in common other than love of country, I think is very much in common. So the weird thing doesn't have legs, but it was brilliant as a short-term diversion.
I agree, like that in the sense that weird is often, people could be proud of it, but maybe it is possible to label like it reminds me of in 1988, Bush won, calling Dukakis liberal. There's nothing wrong with being liberal, and somehow it's stuck as this very negative phrase, and maybe in part cost Dukakis the election. It wasn't really a negative word before then, but he made it a negative word. His campaign made it a negative word. And maybe they're
Yeah,
doing the same thing with the word weird.
yeah. I mean, it was sort of the weak, fun version that everybody could use. But you see Trump using, and also the Republicans, using communist, socialist, and Marxist. And my complaint with that is that the few people who could define any of those terms have already decided. They're not really
Mm.
in play. The people who are paying attention at that level, they know who they're going to vote for. They're not going to change their mind. But by the time you get into the undecideds, the ones who are just basically have a feel for it, it's like, I don't know, I just feel better about this one. Those are the ones that can be persuaded. They're not going to be persuaded by a concept. Well, did you know her father was a Marxist? No. Uh, what's a Marxist again? How's that different than a communist? Wait, but we're kind of socialist, aren't we? Because we have some social security. Is Marxist bad? That I think that's where you get as soon as you get down to the undecideds. They don't even know what the hell that is.
It's the same like the word fascist. Like nobody really understands what
Yeah.
there isn't even actually a very clear definition of fascism, but no one really and I've been hearing the word fascist being called on both sides, but really it's more directed at Trump. And your whole point was if he was going to be Adolf Hitler, don't you think we would have seen that during the 4 years
Right.
he was actually president? But I mean, one could argue there were the lockdowns during COVID that has elements of, to me, that has elements of fascism, and that did occur during his administration. And you have, and I talk to people who say, well, the Democrats persuaded him to do that, but as Harry Truman says, the buck stops here. He was the president. That's the only concern
Yeah.
I have is that he was very manipulated into these economic lockdowns.
Yeah, I think that all the leaders are going to have to answer for whatever they did during the pandemic. But I'll tell you what I said when the pandemic first kicked off, and we knew that we had this brand new thing, or we thought it was brand new, that we'd never dealt with before, and we would be guessing, what to do. And I said, here's my take, and I said it probably 50 times before we do anything about how things would turn out. I said, your leaders are going to have to guess. They're going to have to, because, and they'll guess differently, but somebody's going to be right and somebody's going to be wrong, and you can't tell today. You might have a strong opinion, but you don't know if, let's say, a 2-week work lockdown would make a difference. You wouldn't know. And it would take a long time for us to decide what was real and what wasn't real about the pandemic. So I said, my take on day one is I'm going to forgive every leader who guessed wrong, because it is guessing. And if you're not going to allow that level of humility first to yourself, you don't know the right answer. And then I also predicted, and I hate that I was right about this, that the people who got lucky, and I'm going to call it luck just to make all of your viewers angry, the ones who were right, let's say they took decisions that in the aftermath of it, they say, well, I'm glad I did what I did. Those other people clearly made a mistake with what they did. That people would be claiming brilliance as if they knew all along. Nothing like that is true. Nobody knew all along. It could have gone either way on everything. And, there are a few things you could know, like masks, etc. But for the most part, I don't think anybody knew. I'll give you one classic example. The people who are claiming to be the smartest are the ones who said the government and big pharma had too much money involved. There was too much, mandatory forcing things, or too many sketchy things about ivermectin and whether they'd let you look at it. It looked like they were, all gaming this thing, and so all of the signals told me that I would be unsafe if I took the vaccination. So I hid in the mountains and didn't take the vaccination. Now, that sounds brilliant after the fact, and they're all claiming credit and giving a parade. And then they talk to me, and I say, all right, let me understand this. You looked at a weaponized virus that you knew nothing about because we couldn't know what was the long-term impact of being infected. And then you looked at a vaccination that you also didn't know anything about. So you compared the two risks that you could not evaluate either of them. Now, I decided that the risk of having a weaponized something that somebody had designed to kill, by the way, that would be more of an assumption. If somebody designed something to make it more deadly, that's a pretty risky situation if you get that in you. If somebody else is trying really hard, and it would be their preference, of course, that it worked perfectly, was safe enough, all vaccines have a little danger, safe enough and didn't give you any, bad after effects, that they were at least trying to protect you from that thing that somebody else made to kill you, or at least give you a harder time with the virus. And the proposition was that even if it didn't stop it from spreading, which I predicted the vaccine, in the beginning I predicted the vaccination wouldn't work as a vaccination, but there was some indication it might reduce your hospitalization. And there was some worry about long COVID. Now, all of those were unknown. Was long COVID real? I don't know. Would it be bad? I don't know. Was the weaponized virus going to tell you everything about it by the 2 weeks you had it? Or would there be an after effect that would be really the bad part? If you took the vaccination, would it have no impact on whether you spread it, but would it reduce your hospitalization? And of course, all the data that came out of that is contradictory, so we can't even tell what was true now. So my point is that people were, let's say, had a half opinion, I call it, where you look at the benefit of something but not the cost. They looked at the benefit of not getting the vaccination, but they were somewhat blind to the fact that it was a weaponized virus, and we didn't know what the long-term effect of that would be, and we also didn't know if you got the right vaccination, would it lessen your risk in the long term from some form of long COVID? And I still don't know the answer to any of those questions. So I'm trying to remain humble, so I don't brag about any of my opinions, but I think everybody else should be in that same boat. Our leaders couldn't have known, some guessed right or righter than other people. Nobody did great, in my opinion. And we might be maybe we should be a little more forgiving about those errors as deadly as they were.
I agree in the sense that, we didn't, there was the movie about pandemics that suddenly the whole world goes crazy and shuts down and everybody dies. And so we're afraid of this kind of worst case scenario, as humans almost biologically are. And so we shut down the world economy. And my point is, fascism is when government has this obscene amount of control over business. So for instance, Nazi Germany turns all the companies into, military, weapons making companies.
But
And
this is every country, though. Every country can control its corporations.
right, but I guess some countries do it more or less than others. Like so the shutting down of making it illegal to open up shop for business has elements of fascism. And it happened throughout the pandemic, no matter whether when Trump was president, when Biden was president. But to your point, we just didn't know, and it was scary. And hey, if this is when we pull the fascism card, this is when we do it. But what people don't seem to understand is that if I ask somebody who was a fascist, they'll say Hitler, Mussolini, Mao. Nobody seems to realize these were all socialists originally. Like Hitler was head of the National Socialist Party. Mussolini was head of the Italian Socialist Party. Mao, of course, was a communist.
Yeah,
We're talking about Perón,
yeah.
Argentina yesterday, or Musk and Trump were talking about how great Argentina was in the 30s and 40s. Well, what happened in the 50s? Perón, a socialist who became fascist, took over. Like, it's sort of obvious to me that fascism, the roots, in many cases, like let's say 90%, not in 100%, fascism comes from socialism.
Is that just because claiming socialism is what gets you elected? And
Yeah,
then
I think it's related to
then
populism.
yeah, so then you were just always you were always a fascist, but you couldn't be your fascist self until you fooled them into thinking, "Hey, I'm in it for you. I'm a
Right. First, you have to
socialist."
say, under me, you're going to get everything. And then when you're fascist, you take everything from some percentage of the population that still keeps 90% for you.
Yeah, I mean, all of our leaders are corrupt when they have power. I think that's the bottom line.
Yeah. So, and again, I think this, the other thing about messaging, when Kamala first became the nominee, and by the way, this is more talking the game-like aspects of campaigning. I was thinking about something you said, which is how Hillary was doing well in 2016 in the summer when she said about Trump, "Do you really want his hands on the nuclear button?" And that was driving her up in the polls. And then she switched to "I'm with her," not realizing that 50% of the people might feel funny about that. You know, b-
Yeah.
as much as everybody wants to be, for everybody's rights, just men are men, women are women. There's different things going on in the brain and so on. And I saw with Kamala was using this "I'm with her" for a while. I don't see it anymore though.
Yeah. Yeah, there was a time when Hillary Clinton also said that a woman would make a better leader because they're better at listening, and every part of my body just went, "Oh," like, no. Uh, to me, that seemed so sexist that I couldn't even imagine that her campaign would, last after that. But of course, it did. Um, yeah, that's the overt sexism that they can get away with it is kind of shocking.
And you know, last night, what I heard were two smart guys talking. Whether you agree or disagree with everything both of them were saying or not is not important. It was and what I heard and then what I read this morning in the headlines seemed to be different. And I'm curious about your opinion on that. So I heard things like, look, it's probably a good idea, or it is a good idea to vet people coming into your country to make sure that they're not criminals. It is a good idea to be very worried about countries that have nuclear weapons. It is a good idea to be more efficient about government spending because that causes inflation. By the way, every candidate ever says that, and we'll see whether or not any of the candidates can do something about it. But on and on. I heard kind of smart, common sense things that nobody would disagree with. But and then in the headlines this morning, I read a slurring, rambling Trump incoherently talking with an egomaniac Musk. Musk, who was, by the way, know, did you wouldn't think this guy you would think this guy was like maybe a smart, analyst. You wouldn't necessarily think, this is a billionaire running a bunch of companies that have done very successfully. It just seemed like two smart guys talking. So isn't it what am I hearing that these reporters covering it didn't hear? Or did I miss something?
Well,
Because
we're
the
all going to
reporters are
be,
smart too.
yeah. I mean, predictably in the election season, everybody's just going to put it through their own filter. The part that was really dangerous, and there was a moment when I was listening to it live that I thought it was the end of his campaign. I thought, oh,
Oh
this
wait,
is it.
I have to guess. Well, because I have to guess which part that might have been.
Okay.
Uh, okay, when he was talking about Kamala Harris looking a little like Melania.
uh, no, but that was an interesting. Didn't he actually say that she was a very attractive woman when he talked about Kamala Harris?
Yeah.
Did I hear that? I thought I heard it, and I wasn't sure I could heard it right.
Or he said that there were pictures of her that were very attractive,
Uh,
something like
yeah,
that.
yeah. It was just an interesting concession to the person who's running against. No, here's something that not everybody heard, because apparently, depending on where you were and what you were listening to, he sounded like he was slurring, like his dentures were falling out. He doesn't have
Mm.
dentures. or that he was drunk, or that he just had a stroke or something. Now, apparently that's an audio artifact that is known to happen on Spaces if you're the host, and doesn't seem to hit the other accounts, such as Elon Musk was fine. Now, that's what the smart people who have experience on Spaces tell me, that it's been something that's annoyed other hosts who also sounded the same, and there's a very specific known technical problem that will make a normal person sound like they're slurring, which is my working assumption that that's true because the people who say it's true are, in my view, quite credible. Now, it doesn't matter what's true. It just matters what the Democrats will make of it. And when I heard that, I thought, oh my God, I don't know what this is about. I don't know if he just came from the dentist. I don't think he did. But whatever this is, it's going to be all over social media, and that will be the story that there's something wrong with his brain or something. And sure enough, if you sampled the left and right media, the left was all about rambling and slurring. And that was my take as well. I heard the slurring, although I think it was the technology, not the speaker. And the rambling was because of the format. Elon had a great idea, which is let's do something like a conversation without, a specific end time, and we'll really, you'll get to know somebody this way. The problem is that the person he was doing it with is Trump. And Trump is the most famous filler of space of all people ever. So if you don't say, we've got a tight schedule here, I got to get to a bunch of questions, Trump's got all the time he wants to just keep talking. So he would just start, and he'd just keep going from one topic to another, and he'd get back to the border, and then back to something, and back to the border. And it didn't seem tight. But if you liked Trump, you liked more of it. If you were his opponent, you said, there he is, rambling and slurring, and they weren't too far off. Again, the slurring was the technology, not him. And I don't know that it changed any minds. My guess is not a single voter changed their vote because of it. But I give Elon Musk really a lot of credit for trying a new thing, doing it in a different way, knowing that the old ways of getting our information had all kinds of problems, and putting his neck out. I mean, he risked not only the company, but his own reputation. And that I want more of. I don't think it worked. I think if you had to do it over again, the phone call part of it, it's not good for interrupting. And normal conversations have a normal amount of interrupting, like, okay, I get your point, let's go to the next question. So I think just in terms of controlling the interview so that the audience liked it, it was lacking. I saw Elon just before I got on, asked on X if anybody had done an edited version of something like the best hour of the 2 hours. So I think everybody's aware, that it went a little long. But again, I'm not going to criticize a mistake that was in a brand new thing. All right. If somebody's going to do a brand new thing and they make mistakes, that's a home run because you fix the mistakes next time or you learn something. So in terms of what I want to see America do, A+. But it had some flaws.
I also have to give credit for Elon in it suddenly became more clear to me than ever that buying Twitter was not a mistake for him. Like at first I thought when he first offered to buy Twitter and then he took the offer back, I think he was just at my initial inclination, which I now believe I'm wrong about, is that he was on this Adderall frenzy and he's just like, I'll buy Twitter for $52 billion. And then he's like realized, oh my God, I don't have $52 billion cash to spend like this. But last night, he's basically kind of it's all the talking points for all his companies. Like, shouldn't we have trains and tunnels and, sustainable energy with solar and blah, blah, blah. So everything was like a talking point for his company. And he's saying it to the president of the United, someone who could be the president of the United States and was the president of the United States. Very smart for him to do, like genius. But, it works if Trump wins. But, I can't remember the last time there was a conversation with a presidential candidate that lasted, 2 hours like that, or 2.5 hours. I can't think of any president. Like, I think Barack Obama could have pulled it off if he Like it reminded me in 2008, Bill O'Reilly interviewing Barack Obama. So I listened to that because of the contrast, and I thought it was a really well done interview. Both sides expressed themselves well. It only was a half hour or so, so it wasn't like 3 hours, but I thought that it reminded me a little of that. I can't think of other examples though, really. I mean, can you think of any example from any election?
No, but it reminds me of, Castro talking for 4 hours or something. I think it has more to do with, the personality, and he just had the freedom to say what he wanted to say, and if you're Trump, one of the things you know is that reality is repetition. So what people hear the most becomes the reality. I mean, we're not exactly good rational thinkers. So here he is with this gigantic audience that he knew would be, record-breaking, and they're listening. So any moment that Elon was going to let him keep talking, he would think, okay, I guess I can keep talking. So he just filled all the space. I mean, you wouldn't expect Trump to do less than that. I mean,
Right.
one of the things I like about him is, I say this all the time. If he walks past a table that has a bunch of money and it has a sign that says free money, he'll pick it up. Other people will walk by it. And every time this happens, I'll think, why are you walking past it? That's a free table of money. When he talked to the service workers and said, no tax on tips. It was so simple to pick up the free money that I just laughed. And of course, the Harris campaign were doubly smart. By the way, here's another example of genius. So if you're looking for the Harris campaign, who's the genius behind them? I don't know. But whoever said, you know what? Why don't you just go say you're in favor of that too? Now, in no world did that ever make sense before, to simply immediately embrace your opponent's brand new idea. Never made sense before. And again, if you were in the meeting when somebody brought that up, your instinct would be, okay, that's the dumbest person in the meeting or a genius. And it turned out to be genius. That's 3 in a row. You don't
Yeah.
do that many genius things by accident. So she's got somebody really smart running the show behind the scenes.
Well, it's interesting. This brings up the topic of who are quote unquote they, because always there seems to be, for hundreds of years, people talk about how they really rule the world. There's some mysterious they behind the scenes. And when I've talked to people close to Trump, who's giving him his main advice and so on, people just sort of laugh and say Trump's his own. You cannot tell, he is going to come up with his ideas and strategies. He'll make his decisions. He is doing it. But there is this sense that somebody pulled the strings, for instance, getting Biden out of the race, putting Kamala in the race, coming up with these messaging tactics. Like, it is actually courageous in a political game sense to take your opponent's issues and make them your own and give him zero credit when everyone knows this is his policy, Democrat or everyone knows, but now it's her policy and everyone's cool with that. Like,
Yeah,
there
it
is
worked.
some, but yeah, it worked. So who there is a they in at least in terms of this campaign. Who are they?
So here's how I like to think of the world. This is one of my reframes in my reframe book, that the person with the best idea is always in charge. So this is from my corporate world. You're sitting in the meeting and you're the most junior person in the meeting. Then all the people who know what they're talking about, the experts, the bosses, they talk, and none of them have a good idea. And you wait until everybody's tired. There's a few minutes left in the meeting. You go, I had an idea. Why don't we do a little small test of this? And in a week, we'll have much better information. And everybody gets quiet and they go, oh, yeah, I guess we could just test it because that was the best idea. So the person in charge was the best idea person, not the boss, not the expert, not the guru, the person who said something you can actually do that would work. So in every meeting I've ever been in, after I learned that little trick, I just assumed I was in charge. Because if I had a good idea, it would win the day. And if I didn't, I shouldn't win the day. And I think Trump is a perfect example of the best idea. He scans all of the mostly Republican pundits and smart people, and he looks for ideas that are sticky that he could sell that agree with where he's going, and then he adopts them. And we've been seeing this for years. Often you can identify where it came from. You say, "Oh, I heard that other pundit who's really smart say that the other day, and now Trump's using a version of that. That's probably where he got it." On the Democrat side, I think it might be more the paid expert consultants, are in the room, and probably whoever had the great idea, or maybe more than one, is just getting more attention. So it might be that who's in charge is the person who had the greatest ideas lately that other people recognize as the greatest ideas. So I think it's just smartest person winning is what I see.
I think that's true for, let's say, like the weird. Like somebody said it, it caught on, and everybody was like, looked around at each other and said, "Hey, let's keep running with that."
Yeah.
But this concept of, hey, we need to start making speeches about, or at least leak that we're in favor of no taxes on tips. That's someone put that into motion. Like
Right.
that was come
Right.
up with in a meeting, and someone put that into motion.
Yep.
And someone had to Kamala had to agree to that. Like someone in charge had to agree to that. And so there's two things. There's the right idea man, and there's the person who agreed to it, whether it's Kamala or her campaign manager or whatever. And it seems to me these are unknown people.
Well, think about how much credibility and or power you would have to have over a presidential candidate to get them to say yes to that. Uh,
Yeah.
I mean, either Kamala Harris is being controlled, or she's got a lot of trust in somebody, and she made the right call because whoever she's trusting on that advice is nailing it.
Yeah, I mean, and again, the only other I could think of something it reminds me of, which is Obama in 2008 again on the TARP bailouts. Remember, TARP 1 failed, which was the bailout of the economy. Congress didn't pass it, and it
Mm.
was Bush's job to convince the Republicans in Congress to pass some sort of bailout bill, TARP 2. And it was Bush, McCain, and Obama in an office with all the congressional leaders, and McCain stayed silent. Obama took Bush's side and convinced, the Republicans in Congress to vote for TARP 2. That might have cost McCain, again, it might have been a factor in costing McCain the election, the fact that he was silent during this time. And Obama did have the courage to side with Bush. So that strikes me as a little bit similar, although not the exact thing. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know too much about that story, but I do suspect that there's some Obama influence on the Kamala Harris campaign in terms of the persuasion stuff.
Which and this is and I think this is what disturbs a lot of Democrats, former Democrats. Like let's take the Bill Ackmans of the world, because I found myself, agreeing with everything he was saying. College campuses. My daughter just graduated from Columbia. And by the way, I've written constantly about kids. Do not send your kids to college. Don't own a home. I ended up owning a home and sending my kids to college. And I'm completely ashamed of myself that I couldn't follow my own advice. But I sadly sent my daughter to Columbia. And now there you see the unveiling of anti-Semitism on these campuses. Like people think, oh, people say I'm against Israel, I'm not against Jews. No, they're really against Jews. And you have these 3 deans just fired for talking about the Jews and their money and their privilege. And I feel sad for my daughter that that secretly the leaders of the college, the educational institution she went to, were all kind of thinking this about her, not her specifically, but her generally, being a Jewish student on campus. And what is up with the fact that smart, intelligent people suddenly thinking that, hey, Hamas, they're pretty good people. Okay, nobody disagrees that killing women, children, war is all bad. No one disagrees on that. But the fact that we're just going to ignore October 7th, and now recent polls, people don't even know what October 7th was. They're just like hate Israel. We're just going to ignore October 7th and Hamas is doing. We got to just listen to everything they say. Like, where did this come from? And it seems to be
You
a democratic issue.
well, maybe it comes from just the, environment in the educational institutions where they're just closing off the outside voices, and, if you take, Patty Hearst and you kidnap her and you're the Symbionese Liberation Army, a real story from the past, where they kept her as a captive until Stockholm Syndrome kicked in and she started, siding with her captors, and she started thinking that she could rob a bank too. So that's a well understood thing that if you're isolated from outside influence, that's how a cult works. A cult has to cut you off from outside influences first. So it could be just the lack of outside influences that they hired a certain kind of person, and then you put a bunch of people, no matter who they are, in an isolated place, and you get weird results eventually.
Yeah, I guess I haven't looked at it that way. It's like a Stockholm syndrome effect. And there's, James Lindsay has spoken about how professors on these campuses, since but the difference between the 60s and now is that professors would speak then, but they would just stick to teaching. And now professors are more activists, and that's encouraged the students to be more activists combined with the Stockholm syndrome effect.
Well, I think what it used to be when I was young, people could work together and disagree, and they'd say, "Oh, I like this Republican stuff, and you like this Democrat stuff." And first of all, they weren't super different, so part of it is that the distinction has grown. But then it turned into, if you have this opinion, I can't even talk to you or deal with you, or you're a monster, you're a fascist. So as soon as the rhetoric got to the point where I don't just disagree with you, you're Hitler, that's when whoever had the most people was going to end up having all the people. So in other words, if you got to the point where three-quarters of the people were going to call the one quarter Hitlers, the Hitlers are all going to go get jobs somewhere else or get fired or not get hired. So once you reach like some kind of, maybe it's a two-thirds majority of one opinion, it's going to squeeze out the others if the people who have that opinion can say, you know what, I don't even think you should have a job. Things got pretty harsh.
Yeah, and it's like last night this guy from the EU, Terry, I don't know his last name, Breton or something like that, Benton, I don't know.
Breton, I think.
Yeah, Breton. He wrote to Elon Musk and said, "Do not do this interview. It'll be, you must censor this." And why? Again, we live in a world that pays lip service to free speech. Free speech is a good thing, except we don't want Nazis, for instance, marching downtown. But even there, the ACLU has protected the rights of the American Nazi Party doing marches in the U.S. But now things are different. Now you really tens of millions of people quit Twitter when Elon Musk took over only because he said we're going to allow free speech. And it, you know, look, I once dated someone who was bipolar. And the one thing I learned about bipolar is you could never ask, why did you do this? Because it's crazy. There is no actual answer. It's a crazy answer. Something crazy was happening. And I feel like society, maybe I'm just waking up to it or something, but I feel like society has become mentally ill.
Well, there's something to that. There are studies that show that something like 62% of single liberal women are treated for mental illness. So, depression, anxiety, sort of thing. So the Democrat Party, which is by far dominated by females and a lot of single females, literally are dealing with mental illness as their primary motivating drive. Now, that might seem like hyperbole, but if you look at the policies and then you look at the fact that, something like two-thirds of them have genuine mental problems, you can see why they'd be just simply afraid that Trump would be Hitler. They're afraid their democracy is being stolen. It's the end of elections forever if Trump gets in. And none of these seem to track with anything we saw from him for the first few years of his term, but they would be symptomatic of somebody who's got a mental problem, somebody who's worrying too much about the wrong things.
But it seems like it's not only like I have smart friends who come up to, and look, I don't vote, and I tell people I don't vote. People get very upset at me. I don't care, whatever. But people come. I have friends who come up to me and said, they can't understand. And men, women, they can't understand why anyone, what kind of person votes for Trump. And I'm thinking to myself, 80 million people voted voted for Trump. 80 million voted for Biden. Clearly, there's a lot of people. Like it's half and half, roughly. And you don't know any of them, and you don't know why any of them would. Like you said, there's everybody ranging from Bill Ackman to an evangelical in Alabama to you know you and other people, Elon Musk. So why are people so disconnected now from? It's just simple common sense. Here are people, you see these people every day. They're voting for him, and other people are
Well,
voting. Other smart people are voting for Kamala.
so I've provocatively said recently that you can't have a political conversation with somebody who thinks the news is real. You just can't, because they will be working under some brainwashed understanding of what's happening, and this works both ways. It's not just one side. Politics is mostly a brainwashing competition, and what's different is the news sources are so siloed that even on social media, I have almost no contact except trolls, paid trolls, of anybody on the other side. So in 2016 or something, if I tweeted anything political, maybe a third of my comments would be super disagreement from some Democrat who's mad. Today, the only disagreement I'll get is the very first comment from somebody who's obviously a paid troll because they hate me, but they follow me. They don't have many followers. They have an anonymous, all the tells, and they'll be there consistently. But actual human beings who are not paid to be trolls, almost no contact. The algorithm has separated, even on X, that is not trying to be biased. I mean, I don't think they're trying to be biased. They've completely separated me from any contact with somebody who has a different opinion. And I have to go look for it, or somebody has to send it to me, or I don't even see it. So I make it a habit to make sure I spend a good amount of time looking at MSNBC and CNN and alternate sources so I can at least get a sense of what's going on the other side. But most people aren't going to take the time. I do it for a living. It's part of what I do. So I'm going to check both sides just so I don't sound stupid. But if you don't have any reason to check the other side, it doesn't happen naturally. So that's probably the biggest problem.
So given all this, all that we discussed, and given the fact that you have been, lucky or not, you've been a reliable predictor of these things, what's going to happen?
I don't think
If I'm going to make bets on Polymarket today, what should I bet on?
I
That's
would
how I
bet
vote.
I would bet we won't have a result. So here's what I think. No matter who wins, the other side is going to be absolutely positive something suspicious happened. And they will be so mad, and they will think that it's the end of the world if they don't act, that it's probably going to get dangerous and at least, lawfare and lawsuits and, all kinds of protests and whatnot, no matter who wins. And I don't know that the system can figure out how to solve it, because it'll be things like, well, we have this strong evidence that something suspicious happened here, and if you were to certify this election, looks like it's a big problem. And again, this could be on either direction. I think both sides will claim if they lose, whoever loses is going to say it was rigged. By the way, we have a long history of whoever loses in America says it was rigged. And
But
I
we
don't
don't have
think,
a long history of prosecuting that. So like
right.
Nixon in 1960, Nixon thought Kennedy stole the election. There were dead people who voted in Chicago. Nixon actually took it to court, but he never announced that he was taking it to court. And he conceded the night of the election. And ultimately, the inauguration happened, came and went. So things have been contested, but sort of respectfully.
Yeah. I think January 6th probably changed things. One thing it changed is I think the Republicans would be far less likely to gather in a crowd around the Capitol. I think they learned their lesson that that they're going to get hunted down if they do. But there will be enormous problems either way. I think our system is going to be so full of holes, and that with all the election observers, there'll be so many claims of irregularity, true or false, there will always be claims, that we won't be able to feel comfortable that the claims have been investigated before the deadline for certifying the election. So I suspect it's going to get kicked to the House, and it might be some really terrible process by which the members of the House pick the president, which is, I believe, is the plan B in the Constitution if we can't get it the normal way. And that would
But
pick Trump, I think, and then we got all kinds of trouble.
yeah, so if I'm not sure if that's the plan B in the Constitution, because the Constitution says if there isn't a majority of the electors, gets thrown to the House, but you still have to have electors. You still have to have an electoral college meet. And what you're saying is the electoral college might not even get certified, in which case I don't know if there's a prescription.
Well, the Supreme Court, of course, we always assume that they're the final arbiter, and maybe they would be. But I'm not even sure that the left would believe anything that came out of the Supreme Court at this point. So our systems have degraded in credibility to the point where I don't think anybody's going to trust what happens,
What if
no
there's a
matter which way it
landslide?
goes.
What do you think the odds are of a landslide?
Low, but I will give you that if it's a landslide in either direction, that gives us a comfortable transition of power.
Yeah,
I think that's
that's my hope.
10% chance.
Because like I look at 1972, where we had something similar happen. There was a national ticket on both sides. It was Nixon Agnew, and it was McGovern Eagleton. And Eagleton, there was news stories that he had had shock therapy for depression. Thomas Eagleton was senator from Missouri. He dropped out of the race. So it's the only precedent I could think of a already nationally nominated or soon to be nominated candidate dropping from an election, and McGovern picked Sergeant Shriver, a Kennedy relative, and the uncertainty it created. Nixon wasn't a popular president, and he was already being investigated for Watergate. I think he won 49 states to 1. McGovern only won Massachusetts and DC, and I think that was because of the uncertainty generated by the VP confusion. But that confusion, that uncertainty, didn't seem to happen here with the assumption of Harris.
My take on what Republicans are calling a coup on the Democrat side is it's none of my business.
Yeah,
If I were a Democrat and I didn't like it, well, I would complain. But if actually, technically I am a Democrat. I'm a registered Democrat. But I don't play for that side. If I played for that side and I didn't like what my side was doing, I'd be really loud about it. But I haven't heard even one person complain who's a Democrat. So if the Democrats are happy that that's how they pick their candidate, or at least they're willing not to complain, it's not really Republican business. I mean, that's your new competitor. You better get used to it.
yeah. I mean, and yeah, I'm fine with what the Democrats did. I don't think it was a coup. I think this was a normal process. I think they saw they were going to lose, so of course they had to pick somebody new, and Harris was the obvious candidate. I'm glad they did not have an open convention, or clearly they're not having one, because I think that would create too much uncertainty and confusion. They did the right thing for them. And
Also, I think it should be noted that their most credible players were probably behind it. So if
yeah,
it's true that two former presidents, maybe Hillary Clinton, Pelosi, Schumer, if they were all on the same side, those are the ones that the Democrats would trust to say, okay, this is a once-ever situation. We're going to break some rules, but we're going to break them in the service of getting a Democrat elected. It's hard for a Democrat to say no to that. Like,
right,
it's not ideal, but given the circumstances, I would trust those people to make that
right.
decision for me.
And they were smart to do it quickly and not wait for the convention, for instance.
Yeah.
And I got to give them credit for that. So it sort of stopped the damage a little bit, and of course it reversed it. Like now the betting markets are predicting Harris is going to win. But
Well,
you're
Well, you know what's happening with the polling, right? I'm watching Rasmussen, one of the big
Mhm.
polling companies. Their numbers still say that Trump has a commanding lead, and it didn't really change much. But the other pollsters have been silent for several days, and Rasmussen is publicly mocking them. So, where's your new numbers? So, where's those new numbers? Because there's slightly stale numbers that show Kamala Harris is doing well, and then those numbers drive the betting market, and then the betting market will drive the numbers. So they've created this self-sustaining, building thing. And we'll see if Rasmussen is right, because if next week the polls come in and they don't show Kamala Harris ahead, you'll know that they gamed it.
You know, I always think of the betting market the way people think of the bond market. Like, it's not easy to invest in bonds. There's no like New York bond exchange. You could just go online and buy some bonds. So people who buy and sell bonds tend to be smarter about the economy and investing than retail speculators in stocks. And
Right.
and the betting markets, these are people who are putting money at risk. So they kind of have to look at everything. They just don't look at the latest polls. I sort of feel they're a little
Oh,
smarter about understanding the messaging and
mm,
and so on.
no, I would go the different direction because there's small amounts at play. The bond people are looking at larger amounts, so yeah, they're serious people.
Mm.
But if I put a $200 bet on a betting market, I didn't do any research.
Yeah,
And
you
there's
might. So you're just saying that might just be a kind of sort of poll, another version of polling,
Yeah,
in that sense.
I'm not even sure if it's anything except people having fun or trying to see if they can guess it right. In my case, that's what I would do. It's like, you know what? If I don't put money on this, like I won't be able to hold myself accountable. So I've done a few bets like that. There's all kinds of reasons. I think the betting market is not as predictive as it could be.
And your final conclusion here is that it's going to be very close. We won't have a winner, and from my perspective, that means look out below on the stock market because it's going to be like Gore Bush 2000, where the stock market fell over 20% between election day and inauguration day, and
I hope
uh,
so. I hope so. That would be the easiest buying opportunity of all time. Because one of the things we've learned is it doesn't matter too much who the president is. Having Biden in charge, at least for let's say 6 months, just doesn't make that much difference. So I think if there's chaos and not an obvious transition, the stock market will take a dump, and then I will take every dollar I have and buy in because it'll be back to normal in a month. That would be my
right,
guess. No matter who's in charge, it'll be back to normal in a month.
that could be. I mean, I always used to think, and I've written about this, that who the president is doesn't matter. But then you start looking at the international, what they talked about last night, what Musk was talking about, how you know, would Russia have been as confident in Ukraine if there was a strong president? Would Iran has been as confident with their manipulation of Hamas and the Houthis and Hezbollah
Mm.
if there was a strong president? And then it reminds me of JFK. Like, would the Cuban Missile Crisis have happened if there was no Bay of Pigs? Like, JFK was a weak president, or started off as a weak president, ended up as a strong one. Jimmy Carter, American hostage crisis, he was perceived as weak. And then the day Reagan what became president, Iran had to release the hostages. Like, so it was clearly there was a difference between a weak president and a strong or maybe semi crazy president.
Yeah,
And definitely other presidents or leaders are afraid of the crazy. And so
yeah.
in that sense, it might matter. I don't know.
Yeah, I would agree it matters in the longer term and for the big international stuff. But I don't think the stock market's going to matter in any 6-month period. I do expect that Trump could actually deliver on some of the crazy claims, like I could solve Ukraine the first day. I think he actually could. Now, I
Like, what
wouldn't
would he
bet on
do?
it. I wouldn't bet on it. I think you just say, "Hey, Putin, here's the deal. You know this isn't gonna go anywhere. You know you're not gonna get more. And, Ukraine, hey, you know you're not gonna get all of that land back that they took. How about this? We'll just say that we're not gonna make, Ukraine a member of NATO, and we just sort of keep what you got and go back to our business. How about that, Putin? Because the alternative is destruction. And suddenly, people start getting a little bit more reasonable. Now, there's some thinking that Ukraine's latest attempt to take some Russian territory that's not part of the occupied Ukrainian stuff is just to have some negotiating stuff. So we'll give you back this part of Russia if you give us this part of Ukraine that you took. And that's what it looks like to me. So to me, it looks like Zelensky is preparing to negotiate. Putin said explicitly he's preparing to negotiate. I think they're just waiting for Trump.
And I want to just quickly mention and ask you about, as you mentioned, you do this for a living. You didn't always say that. You were the Dilbert guy, and suddenly you do this for a living now. Like you have your coffee with Scott Adams, which I listen to as whatever I'm at my desk at that time. I'm listening to you, and you've been very good at building up an entire platform around your kind of thoughts on current events, particularly politics, and your analysis from the prism of it's looking at it from a hypnosis point of view, or I would say a game theory point of view. You're like the best at this. And 8
Well,
years ago, you would say you wouldn't take a side. You were even saying I'm for Hillary Clinton because I have to be, otherwise I could be in danger. So
well, that yeah.
you would kind of play both sides, and also you kind of had this thing where if both sides hated you, that's how you would get the most observers, which I don't think with the new algorithms turns out to be true anymore.
Yeah,
I
no.
think you have to be polarized. I think I've been hurt by not being more polarizing. Like I really try to, and I'm not saying you don't do this. I think you do this, but I really try to understand both sides and have both sides be welcome coming on this show and answering my questions. But I think then it doesn't excite people as much as being polarizing.
Yeah.
And what do you think?
Well,
What's your advice for me?
I think if I were more biased, I would have 10 times a bigger audience. So I agree with you completely. One of the things that you and I think both do is try to talk about the tools of how to know what's real. Like how do you navigate your world? So I'm more about focusing on how you know what's real and how you analyze and making sure it's not a half opinion, it's a whole opinion, that sort of thing. And so I've developed a number of viewers who like that, but that's not going to be 80% of the world. That's always going to be 2% of the world. But
Right.
but here's the important part. Somebody asked me this the other day. They said, "How many public figures are watching your show?" And my answer is all the ones that matter. Not every show, of course. But I mean, even Trump would watch my show from the Oval Office, I heard. So, of course, he's sampling all the shows, not just mine. But as long as I reach the people who are the thinkers and movers, and I can help them just get a little extra tool, so they've got an extra way to express something, maybe a better way to persuade, something to stay away from, I can just make them a little bit more effective. So I think of myself as a force multiplier, meaning that my impact is on other influencers, and then they have the bigger audiences.
I think that's right, and I think you do a really good job kind of looking at the meta game, which is, oh, here's this new message. How did they come up with this? Is it good? Is it bad? Is it true? I think the statement "is it true" is a very important prism to view these things, that are in the media. But because you apply it most to what you're interested in, which is, for instance, this political election and your views on it, I think that does get you have become polarizing. Like if it used to be 4 or 5 years ago, if I would tell people, "Oh, Sky Adams is coming on the podcast," people who are on one side would say, "Why would you have that right wing sicko on your podcast?" Like, and you're always been a moderate in my view. Like it's crazy that anybody would think you're right wing at all. But but it did polarize people, and that I think, look, it got you on the one hand banned in some cases because of with Dilbert, but in other cases it built you a platform.
I think there's a new movement that I keep talking about, but I feel like people will understand this better. There's a new force. It's not left or right. I call them the internet dads. And maybe I'll put you in that category. So Elon Musk is not left or right because he's said very clearly he's always supported Democrats. He could maybe the next time he will. But he's an internet dad. And if you look at the conversation that he had with Trump, you notice he left out the real red meat stuff. Nothing about abortion, nothing
Right.
about religion. I don't
Nothing
think
about
he talked
taxes, by
about.
the way.
I don't think he talked about trans, did he?
No.
Because those are not exactly the internet dad issues. The things that, let's say, David Sachs, Bill Ackman, you and I would be in favor of are things that nobody who has a brain should be against. In other words, there's some things like, I think we need border security. That's not really left or right, and of course shouldn't be. That is dad. That's dad saying, look, there's a reason we locked the car. There's a reason we locked the house. There's a reason to lock the government or the country. So I think the common sense people are leaning a little toward Trump for 80% of his platform. And I think that's the big change is the common sensors are willing to say, you know what, I can't be a Democrat if you can't be a little bit more sensitive to some of these dangers that are obvious.
Well, listen, what's the next book? You should write a book called The Internet Dads.
Well, I started working on a document, I don't know if it'll be a book or something smaller, about how to spot fake news and how to know when you're being brainwashed. And I
I like
realized
that.
I developed a whole bunch of, little tools and tricks. I'll just give you one. One of my favorites is the two on the nose. You may have heard me say that. You'll hear a story that if there's a popular narrative that says, I don't know, that if you do a certain thing, you'll die. And then very soon after that, there's a story about somebody who did the exact thing and they died. The first thing I say is, that's a little too on the nose. That's a little too perfect fit to that narrative. And if you just always tell yourself, whenever you see one that's too perfect, almost certainly not true. And then you start keeping attention or paying attention to how often you're right when you use the two on the nose thing, and you'll be amazed. It's like 90% predictive. So that's just one tool. There's 100 more.
I like that one. You ever see the movie Minority Report?
I think I don't have a firm memory of it.
That's the one where they use AI basically to predict crimes
Oh
before
yeah.
they happen.
Uh,
So, and I think Colin Farrell's the detective, and come into this case and they get in a room where there's all this evidence, and Colin Farrell says, "Boy, there's an orgy of evidence here," and then he says, "The last time I've seen a case where we go into a room where there's an orgy of evidence, never. Like there's something wrong with what's
right.
happening." So
Yeah. The,
that's
the 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 real world is so weird that a real story stands out because there's something just wrong with it. So take for example the Secret Service not fully protecting Trump at the rally. On day one, I said, this could be anything. It could be that worst case thing where there's some inside job to kill Trump. Maybe, maybe. But far more likely, you're going to find out this is a Dilbert situation where people didn't communicate well and they just didn't perform. And then
sure.
one day after another, it dribbled down. Well, I thought you said you would cover the roof. And I'm like, there it is. There it is. Now, I'm not going to say that's the whole story because I think there's still some room that there might have been some bad behavior. I don't have evidence of that. I'm just saying that from a conspiracy theory possibility, maybe there's more to it. And maybe it's just, maybe some of these Secret Service just didn't care as much. I mean, that could be part of it. If it had been the most beloved person in the world and everybody felt that way, maybe having somebody watching the roof would have just automatically happened and nobody would have known the difference. So, yeah, I think looking for messiness, that's a good sign of a real story.
Yeah, like I always use something I call conspiracy numbers, which is if the number of things that has to conspire together for a fact to be true or for a statement to be true, if the number of things gets greater and greater, it's less likely for this assumption to be true. So if for like 9/11 is an obvious one, if thousands of people would have to agree to be silent until they die, and then even afterwards, no news. Like the conspiracy number for this to be for 9/11 to be a conspiracy to be true, it's just too high, so it can't be true. And similar with the Secret Service, it's just it's more like what you just said. Is there was a culture of okay, the head of the Secret Service probably doesn't like Trump, so we're not going to pay as much attention to detail as we normally do, and then bad things eventually happens. You know, the unlikely black swan event happens eventually, and that's what I sort of feel happened.
So my new persuasive, but I mean it seriously, thing is that Trump should require his current Secret Service staff, the team, to each of them say in writing that they don't believe the Fine People hoax, which Kamala Harris is pushing again this week and Biden pushes. The idea that Trump had ever called neo-Nazis fine people. If you're hearing this for the first time, even though you think you heard it on video, you didn't, because they edited it out the part where he said, just to be clear, I'm not talking about the neo-Nazis. So if you take that part out, people are fooled into thinking they saw it with their own eyes. Anyway, the point is, if you really thought he said that, would you protect him? And the answer is, if you're a normal human being and you thought that the guy you're protecting had once actually in the real world praised neo-Nazis, I'm not sure I'd put in 100%. And so I would make every one of them say in writing, do you understand that this didn't happen in the real world? And then I would go further and I would make the head of the Secret Service say in writing, so that every member of the Secret Service could see it, this is a confirmed hoax. We'll link to Snopes, which calls it a hoax. They didn't always, but now they do. And I would make sure there was nobody guarding me who thought I might be a neo-Nazi supporter. Very important.
Yeah, that would be a good strategy there. What other strategies? Last question. I know I've kept you here for a while. What other strategies would you suggest to Trump? I mean,
Well,
Kamala's doing these genius strategies, and I agree with it. It's like unbelievable how she's been doing this. What should Trump do now?
Well, it depends on the attack. So if the attack is he's going to steal my democracy and become a fascist dictator, I've recommended that he have lunch with some just ordinary voters, Democrats who are afraid of him, and film it and just say, how exactly am I going to steal your democracy? And then they'd say something like, well, you're forcing women to do things with their bodies or not do things. You're controlling their bodies. And then he would say, probably, well, I took that out of my control. So it's the federal government and the Supreme Court is completely out of it. That's what I did. I gave it to the states. There are more women voters in every state. They can have anything they want because half of the men in the state already agree with abortion. So if women by a large majority want it, they will vote in the people that they want or they'll get the laws that they want. So what I did was take it out of my control totally and move it closer to women so women can have the final say. Now, imagine you're sitting there and the president says that to you. You're going to pause. You're going to say, you know what? This is really inconvenient for women who want abortions because it's not going to happen right away, whatever you're saying, if it does happen at all. But you did actually take it out of your control and you gave it closer to the people. That's not a terrible point. So I believe that if he just talked like a human, take out the stump speech and you're just talking to him one-on-one, his personal charisma is insane. I don't know if you've had the pleasure to talk to Trump personally, but if you talk to him personally, you can see why he's president. But, by the way, I had the same feeling about George Bush the Younger. First time I saw him before he was running for president the first time, I was at an event where I gave a speech and he was giving a speech. And he walks in the room and you could just feel it. You could feel the personal power of George Bush the Jr. And even in that moment, I said, oh, my God, he's going to be a president. And sure enough, he got there. So Trump has that thing. So if you could unleash that thing, that personal charisma, in a very small event with some Democrats and just film them having an experience, I would love to see that. It could go off the rails. I mean, it'd be risky. They might just go crazy or something. But I think they would be polite. And if you simply told him his side and say, look, Republicans are the ones that want you to have the most free speech. The states have the most power and not me. I'm trying to give away my power. You saw me do it with abortion. And he could make the argument that it's all just made up and the news isn't real. And I think people would go and think about it for a long time. So I think he needs to get down to the Democrat voter level and not be always up in the clouds.
Yeah, that is a good approach. Well, we'll see if that happens. There's a lot more fun the screenwriters of 2024 are going to have before this year is over.
Yeah.
And I am worried about the close election. Like I think violence could occur. I think bad things could happen. So we'll see what happens. I mean, Nate Silver makes the point that if Kamala doesn't win Pennsylvania, she only has a 3% chance of winning the election. I don't know where he gets his numbers, but it was interesting that she didn't pick Josh Shapiro to be her VP candidate because of that. But we'll see if the election's close or not on either side. And Scott, once again, thank you for coming on the podcast and trying to make sense of all this confusion that is out there.
Thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure. I love your interview style. I tell people, even when you're not listening, that you're my favorite interviewer over these 8 years. Nobody does this better. You do this better than anybody, in my opinion.
I appreciate that. Thank you. I work really hard at it. I study the greats, so I work really hard at this. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, James.